is Tom Drysdale in Flagstaff, Arizona, interviewing Dr. Max Prince for the American Overseas Schools Archives at Northern Arizona University. The date is May the 17th, 1991. Hello, Max.
Hi, Tom. It's great to be here with you.
Well, it's good to see you again. Max, for the record, please tell us what your present address is.
My present address is Box 82, Education, Memorial University of Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland, A1B, 3X8, Canada.
Okay, now, Max, do you have a permanent address where someone looking for you in the future, if you're no longer at that address that you just gave us, could contact you?
Yes, Route 2, Pelham, Georgia, 31779.
Okay, do you have a telephone number there that you would want to give or not?
It would be dicey, but 912-294-4890.
Okay, how long, roughly, Max, do you think that you will be at the first address up in Canada?
For sure, 2 more years, and possibly more.
Okay, do you have a telephone number at that address in case someone wanted to contact you?
I don't have a home telephone at the moment because I gave up my apartment, and I'm looking quickly to give you my office telephone number at the university.
Fine.
It's 709-737-7621.
Okay, thank you, Max. Now, if you can recall, can you tell us how many years that you were overseas working for the military departments and the dependent schools in the education program for the military dependents?
Yes, I can. I was there 11 years.
11 years. Mm-hmm. All right, Max. Now, to begin with, prior to you going overseas for those 11 years, what was it that stimulated your interest in overseas education? In other words, why did you go?
Well, I think as a farm boy growing up in Georgia, I always dreamed of traveling, and I didn't see myself having the money to travel as a teacher in Georgia, which I was. And this looked like it would give me the opportunity to perhaps see the pyramids and a great deal more of the world that I would like to see.
All right. Now, since you were interested in education, does that mean that you were already, I guess you were like most of us, you were already employed in education, probably in the public schools, where, Georgia or?
Yes, I had been teaching in Georgia, teaching and administration for 6 years prior to my going overseas.
I see. Where was that, Max?
Mostly in North Georgia. I started off in Cartersville, Georgia. I had a year in Cobb County near Atlanta, and a year at the University of Georgia, and then 2 more years back in Cartersville, Georgia.
That was all before going overseas?
Yes.
All right. Now, Max, would you please tell us, for the record again, run through chronologically, starting with the first assignment on up through your last assignment.
My first assignment was to Wheelus Air Force Base, Tripoli, Libya. And I must say I greatly enjoyed it. It was a shocking experience to be in Libya, but I enjoyed it nevertheless.
And what did you do there?
In Libya, I was a 6th grade teacher.
Okay.
And from Libya, I was transferred the next year to Spangdahlem Air Force Base in Germany. And there I was 6th grade teacher, and the principal became ill, and I was made acting principal for the remainder of the year. Following that wonderful year in Germany, I went to, as teaching principal to Shepherd's Grove in England. And following that, I was assigned to RAF Crowton in England for 2 years as principal. And then I went to Laon, L-A-O-N, France, to be assistant principal, grades 1 through 8 or 9, I forget, we had a junior high. And then I had 2 years at Two Rosiers near Nancy in France. And that's when de Gaulle told us goodbye.
Were you principal then?
I was principal at Two Rosiers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was transferred to Izmir, Turkey as elementary principal. And I enjoyed 2 wonderful years there. And my last year was in Morocco at Kenitra, a Navy base. So in my experience overseas, I started out working for 7135th School Group, an Air Force institution. In France, the last part of my time there, I was working under the Department of Army, and then finally the Navy in Morocco. So I worked for all 3 branches.
Army, Navy, and Air Force.
That's right.
All right. Now, you mentioned one assignment up through the 8th or 9th. That would include junior high. The other assignments, were they as elementary principal at those levels?
Mostly they were elementary principals, and as you know, many of our schools overseas varied from time to time. Sometimes elementary would go through 8th grade.
Right.
And sometimes through 6th grade.
Right, okay. But what I'm getting at is that
I'm not high school.
You had not been a high school principal or a teacher. Okay. Now, Max, what was the first year that you went overseas, and then I guess 11 years after that would be the last year, right?
Yes, I believe I went over in 1959.
1959, and then 11 years would have been about 1970, I guess, huh? Yeah. Okay, fine. Now, since you left the dependent schools program overseas, which first was, as you say, Army, Navy, and Air Force, they used to operate their separate systems, and then later on become the DOD system, Department of Defense Dependent School System. Since then, where have you worked?
Well, I came back to the United States to get my doctorate at Florida State University, Tallahassee, Florida, and I accomplished that goal, and I have a doctorate in early childhood education. And after graduating there, I obtained a job in St. John's, Newfoundland, in Canada at Memorial University. And I've been there ever since.
And you've been there ever since, I see. Okay. Now, Max, if you can, and this is a very difficult question, what, in your estimation, was the most unique aspect regarding working with the dependent schools overseas? Anything that might come to your mind as being atypical or different from working in the States, in public schools or private schools? What was different about it?
Well, for one thing, the actual work of teaching American children was approximately the same as I had been doing in Georgia. But at the end of the day, if I wanted to drive off of the military base, I was in a foreign country. And in some cases, my school was in the foreign country and not on a base. So I had the pleasure of working with the American children, but also the pleasure of experiencing living in quite a few different countries. And then, of course, when I had vacation time, I furthered that by traveling in even more countries.
So you got to experience these other cultures while at the same time continuing the education of the American boy and girl. Just to reiterate, first you were at Wheelis Air Force Base in Libya, right?
Yes, sir.
And then from there you went to what, Spangdahlem, Germany?
That's correct.
Okay, we've got the Libyan culture, now the German, and then was it that you went into England?
3 years in England.
3 years, so the English culture you got well acquainted with.
And an opportunity to take a course at Cambridge.
At Cambridge University?
Cambridge University.
A wonderful experience. And then from there, was it that you went to Turkey?
France.
To France, right.
3 years in France.
So the French culture there, and then Turkey.
And then Turkey.
And then Morocco. Well, that's quite a wonderful and varied background.
Now, I did forget that in Morocco, I was supervising principal over the high school, the elementary school, and a small elementary school that was located out on a site.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that you did have some supervisory experience at the secondary level. Yes, All right. Now, before we close, Max, do you have anything that you would like to record, or any questions that you might ask that we could follow up with to help you? We want to stay in contact with you. The American Overseas Schools Archives are your archives, and of course the others who served overseas.
Well, as you are well aware, I'm in contact with over 50 people, personal contact, that worked in the overseas program. And I have contributed what information I have on those people to the archives. I look forward in the future to going to the archives and seeking out people that I'm not in contact with that I'd like to be in contact with. So
Well,
I'm really looking forward to that service.
Okay, well, a lot of people have expressed that same desire, and as I said earlier, the archives are your archives, and we welcome any time you want to visit the archives and to look at the records we have, all of the memorabilia that we have that will help you recall some good old times and that sort of thing. So they are your archives, Max, and please feel free to visit them at any time.
Well, I certainly appreciate it, and as you know, I picked up about 4 or 5 names and addresses that I'm going to follow through with on this visit.
Right.
And I'm really looking forward to making those contacts.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Max. We're very glad to talk to you. Once again, this is Tom Drysdale interviewing Dr. Max Prince in Flagstaff, Arizona on May the 17th, 1991 for the American Overseas Schools Archives at Northern Arizona University.
Well, that means it's on when the red light goes.
Right. This is Tom Drysdale interviewing Dr. Alfred Beerbaum and Mrs. Martha Beerbaum for the American Overseas Schools Archives at Northern Arizona University. The interview is taking place in Flagstaff, Arizona on May the 18th, 1991. Hello, Al.
Hi.
And hello, Martha. We're very pleased to have you here today. Would you please tell us first what your present address is?
The same for both of us.
Yes.
908 Sunset Drive, Pacific Grove, California, 93950.
All right. Now, is that the same address as a permanent address, say 5 years from now, if someone was trying to look up the Beerbaums?
We adopted this address in 1968, and we expect to stay there to the very end.
Okay, that is your permanent address.
Yes.
Now, can you tell us your telephone number?
Yes. 408 area 372-0960.
All right, thank you. Now, since this interview regards your experience overseas with the overseas schools, would you please tell us how many years that you were overseas working with the dependent school systems?
Altogether, 14 years. We were on board the very day the schools opened in 1946. I think it was October 14th. We stayed for 3 years and went home. to found a family, you might say, because we had married in 1949, that summer, and the next year we started having boys, 1, 2, 3, in short order. But in 1956, a rare opportunity presented itself for us to return to the dependent schools in Germany.
I see. So you met one another overseas.
Yes,
Where was this?
in Heidelberg.
In Heidelberg, and you were an educator, is that right, Al?
All right. Yes.
Okay, and what were you, Martha?
Well, I joined the Army as a civilian in 1947 and went to Heidelberg where I worked in personnel. And there I met Al. And
I see.
we were yes, that's
You met whom?
I met Al Beerbaum. Who
Met-
did I say?
She calls me Alfred. Nobody.
All right, now let me switch back to you, Al, and tell us what it was that stimulated your interest in going overseas in the first place.
The fringe benefits. I was born in Germany, and the desire to return once now and then was very strong, and here was an opportunity. I hadn't been back in Germany since 1928 when I first came to America, and here in 1946 Dick Meyering persuaded me to join them, the schools in Germany.
I see. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your educational preparation and what you were doing just before going overseas? The schooling you had, where you went to college, and that sort of thing.
Oh. I went to college in 1934, and in 1938 graduated from Colby College in Maine.
Colby?
Colby.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people say, Colgate, oh, I know where that is. And I said, no, not Colgate, Colby. And it was a small college. Very intimate relations with everyone on campus because it was that small. And after graduation in 1938, I answered a call to University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. They offered me a fellowship. And after 2 years, I had my master's degree there in German and comparative literature.
Comparative German or English literature? Or all literature?
Well, English, German, and French mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got my MA in 1940, I got a fellowship from New York University to continue toward the PhD. I finished all requirements except the dissertation in that year when the war came, and there was a hiatus in studies for 4 years, after which I got a job at Michigan, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and ran into, as I said before, Dick Meyering. He hired me in 1946, and chance would have it, he did it again in 1956. So he was quite a personality in my life. I mean, twice he steered me into a certain direction.
So he was instrumental in your going overseas, I guess,
Yes.
to a degree.
Yes.
All right, now that's your professional preparation. Tell us where you went to school. Now you say that you didn't come to this country until you were
1928 when I was 14
I see. Where did you first go to school? Was that in Germany?
in Germany.
Whereabouts? And what kind of a school? Whereabouts in Germany was
Well,
this?
it was an elementary school for 3 years, and then I went to a so-called middle school. which leads to what we would here call a high school diploma. But I didn't complete it because we emigrated to America. And I joined here the schooling in Waterbury, Connecticut, in the 8th grade, graduated 6 months later, and in the fall of 1929 went to high school, a commercial high school, incidentally.
I see. That was where now?
In Waterbury,
In Waterbury, Connecticut. Now, in Germany, was it a Hochschule that you had started?
No, a Hochschule in German is a university.
I see.
It was a höhere Schule, a high school.
I see. All right.
You have elementary school and gymnasium, and in between you have a middle school. The gymnasium leads to the university.
Mm-hmm.
The middle schule ends at the age of 15, after 9 years of schooling, and then you enter some trade and so on.
Mm-hmm.
University was not in the cards for me, nor in for anyone in the family. That was something rare in
I
Germany.
see. I
People,
see.
Relatively few people in Germany go to university,
Mm-hmm.
compared to America, where almost 50–60% of high
Right.
school students go to college.
Right. Now, where was this in Germany, Al?
In Rendsburg on the Kiel Canal,
I see.
in the very northern part of Germany.
Uh-huh.
It was Danish until 1864, and some of my ancestors were Danes.
I
But
see.
by the time I was born, it was German. But that enters into history here now, how it became. They were German-speaking people, and they spoke Low German as well as High German.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's a pretty good synopsis of your background. Martha, where were you born and raised, so to speak, and where did you go to elementary and high school?
Well, I'm from Chicago, and I wasn't in the educational system. I was more in business, and when I went to Germany, I went to work in the office.
Well, but in the Chicago area, you went to elementary school there, did you?
In the elementary school and the high school.
And high school in the Chicago area, a suburb or?
No, in the Chicago proper.
Right in Chicago, I see. I see. All right. Now, when you finished high school, did you have any college preparation or?
I went strictly into business.
A business, I see. Uh-huh.
So it was that way that I went overseas to work for the Defense Department.
I see.
Germany.
All right. Now, tell us, Dr. Beerbaum, what was the first year you went overseas with the dependent schools?
1946.
1946.
Yes.
All right. Now, tell us in chronological order, starting with your first assignment, where you went until you finished overseas.
I had expected to teach in high school, in somewhere in Germany, in one of the high schools, but the school system had developed the phenomenon of introducing German for all children of the Army dependents. And so I was enrolled in the headquarters position to become sort of a liaison person between the German teachers who had been hired and the headquarters. Also to develop courses together with the teachers, and oversee the German-speaking program. It was all German in the early days. It's the only country we were in, till later on when Germany became a sovereign state again, and the armed forces spread out all over Europe.
Okay, so your first assignment in 1946 was with the Department of Army in what city in Germany?
In
Your first assignment?
It started out in Frankfurt.
In Frankfurt?
Yes, but very early, about 3–4 months later, the headquarters was relocated in Heidelberg,
Mm-hmm.
where it stayed until the summer of 1948, when it was again relocated to Karlsruhe where it has been ever since.
Yes. What was the name of that headquarters to begin with, that Army headquarters? Was that the Dependents Education Group?
557, I forgot the number now, 77.
It had a number, huh?
Yes,
No.
Dependence Education Detachment.
Oh, yes.
It was.
Oh, yes. And then later on, was it a group, DEG, Dependents Education
came
Group?
later.
That came
Well,
later.
I got through 1949. My tour was 3 years, and then I elected to return to the United States
Uh-huh.
to obtain my doctorate.
Your doctorate, and then and the doctorate was at New York University.
New York University.
And then you went back, and where did you?
In 1956,
Mhm.
I taught at various universities in the meantime, but I ran into Dick Meyering again in 1956,
Mm-hmm.
and he was instrumental in having me report to Wiesbaden, the Air Force school system, newly activated, in just about the same capacity, except that there were schools all over Europe at that time.
Under the Air Force.
Yes.
And that was the 7135th School Group, wasn't it?
Yes.
At Wiesbaden, where now in Frankfurt and then Heidelberg, that was the Dependents Education Detachment, did you say first?
Yes.
And who was the director or the superintendent of that?
One of Colonel Hall, HAW, was the head, and the civilian head was Virgil Walker,
Oh, I see.
who started what was part of the nucleus of the staff for the schools at that time, and who later went to the Department of Education in Washington.
Oh, I see. All right, now still going chronologically, I'm trying to track this. You started first in '46 at Frankfurt,
Frankfurt,
and then went to
Heidelberg,
Heidelberg. Was that in '46 or '47?
47 and 48.
'47 at
Yes,
Heidelberg.
and in the summer of 48, the school headquarters moved to Karlsruhe.
All right,
In
and
Smiley Barracks.
Smiley Barracks in Karlsruhe. And then how long were you there?
Till 1949,
Until,
until I went home in September
mm-hmm,
of 1949.
and got your doctorate.
Yes,
And then you came back in what year?
1956.
56, and then that was to school group in Wiesbaden.
Right.
And then how long were you there?
I stayed there for 2 years,
2 years,
and then transferred to the Army school system, my old outfit actually,
mm-hmm.
in Karlsruhe.
I see. What did you do for the 7135th school group in Wiesbaden?
Well, I was coordinator of the German, the foreign language program for 1 year, and then the Air Force lost its program, a language teaching program, and I became coordinator of the Host Nation Relations program
Mm-hmm.
for a year. And when also that came to an end, the Army was expanding its program in these fields, and I became the specialist for languages and host nation relations in Karlsruhe.
Back over with the Department of the Army.
Yes.
Now
Which
the
then, of course, had enormously grown. By 1949, there were 5,000 children
mm-hmm.
in the school system.
Mm-hmm.
When I returned in 57, 58 to the Army, I mean, well, the Army alone had about 60, 70,000 students, and when later on in the early 60s it was combined with the Air Force, it's well known, there were over 100,000
Right,
children.
right. Most of the Army schools were concentrated in Germany, at least continental Europe, weren't
Right.
they?
Right.
Whereas when you worked for the 7135th School Group in Wiesbaden, and you were responsible for the language program and then later on the Host Nations program, you were working, or you were at the headquarters of a system of schools all over Europe, Scandinavia, the Mediterranean and the Middle East.
I remember school visits from Oslo to Rabat and Nurse,
Right, in Morocco.
and in Libya, Wheelers,
Uh-huh.
and so on. It was a very interesting program. Also, at that time, we were still had many schools in France, which were subsequently closed, however, and Charles de Gaulle separated out from NATO.
Now, Martha, you were, while Dr. Beerbaum was in Wiesbaden, did you come up there and work in personnel for the Air Force, or?
No, I worked in personnel in the Army from 47 to 49. What was interesting about the school group at that time was that the teachers, all the teachers, had to have 4 years of college plus 2 years of experience before they could even apply for positions with overseas schools, which made the overseas schools an exceptionally fine group of schools.
Mm-hmm.
And we noted that when we recruited teachers, that first of all, they had to have the basic qualifications before they were even considered for the school group.
Oh, I see. And then plus the fact they had to have the experience, too.
The 2 years experience
Oh, I
was
see.
necessary
Oh, I see.
before they would be considered.
I see. Well, you were working with the Department of the Army in the personnel office, and then you went back to the States with Al when he got his doctorate.
And
You started raising a family, I assume.
became, as they say, just a housewife.
I see. So when you went back to Wiesbaden in 1956, you were a housewife then,
That's right.
and raising children. Now, how many children?
We had 3 children.
Three
Boys.
3 boys.
And they went through the system for about 10 years. And when they came to the States, they found that the basic education they had in Germany was almost superior to what they subsequently had when they went to California.
So it was quite easy for them, I assume, to matriculate into the California system.
Into the California system, and
I
they had
see.
a good background for college.
Yes, I see. All right. Well, you say now that you've left Europe and come back to California. Now, tell us about that story. What were you doing in California?
Well, it was by a fluke that I got an offer from the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. I had applied a year and a half before it actually took place. And so we moved over to California and ended our association with the dependent schools. Our children were growing into high school and college age, and we felt they should know where they belonged ultimately. And so it all came together for us very well in our family life, so that we left at the time we did.
I see. And you moved to Monterey, California,
Yes.
and you worked for the Defense Language
Language
Institute. And how many years did you work there?
From 67 to 1980 when I retired. I was 13 years with the Defense Language Institute, first as coordinator of curriculum development for the 25 language departments which comprise the Institute. And later on, I headed up the evaluation division for the Institute.
I see. Now, who were the students that attended the Defense Language Institute?
The Defense Language Institute is, as the name implies, for soldiers.
Uh-huh.
The students were 90% enlisted and 10% officers. The students had about 1.2 years of college before they came to us. And then they subjected themselves to a very intensive language program for about a year.
I see. So the military departments had a particular career objective in mind for these young women and men that went there. Is that right?
Yes, indeed.
And I assume there were women that went there too?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
WACs were quite prominent,
Uh-huh.
although more entered as students than left as students, the marriage rate was very high. 10% blacks and 90% GIs at just the right age in their lives.
Well, that's very interesting. All right, now I want you to reflect back, both of you, on your experiences overseas, working with the American boys and girls and youth, attending elementary and middle, junior, and high schools. Can you think of anything or things that were particularly unique or atypical, different in those experiences you had in comparison to if you would have had similar jobs back here in the United States?
Well, I mentioned the word fringe benefits before. Of course, every teacher traveled while over there, and in fact, they were encouraged to do so, to come in contact with other peoples, other nations, and learn something through the comparative possibilities of their own culture. And teachers pursued this with a vengeance. I mean, every weekend, I remember we were out, we had a car then, and we sought out some spot, not just for picnicking, but cultural spots, visits to public buildings, castles and churches. And with all of Europe open to us, it was a rare opportunity.
It was a wonderful opportunity.
Yes.
Were there any particular hardships that that you had to endure in comparison with a lack of hardships here stateside at the time? I can remember, I think, Martha, at one time you telling me that when you first went overseas, over to Germany, that the dollar-Deutschmark relationship was very favorable for us, and then there were different items that the Americans bartered or used to barter with. Can you tell us a little about that?
That was an interesting thing about life in Germany right after the war. German money was of no use to anyone. The cigarettes and the coffee was what the Germans were interested in. And with cigarettes, you could buy anything. You could buy. We were not allowed to buy any German food, but articles, jewelry, things for the home would be sold by many Germans for the cigarettes, which they in turn would barter among Germans for things they wanted.
That was a long time ago.
Well, this was
It was a wonderful system.
This was 47 to 49.
It was, I mean, you had a passport to almost all of Europe and enjoyed advantages which the local populations did not share.
Well, as they said at the time, we Americans never had it so good because everything was for us. For instance, we could travel the trains at a cent a mile.
My goodness.
And we always rode first class because the trains had been, it wasn't confiscated, they had been
well, much abused during the war.
no, but what did the...
Taken over, that would
Yeah,
mean
yes.
Requisition?
Requisition, that's a better word.
Mm-hmm.
They requisitioned the parlor cars, and the Americans rode in the parlor cars, or first classes.
They became Duszüge.
Yes.
D-U-S, meaning D stood for fast train in German, and then of course belonged to the U.S.
Oh, D-U-S, I
Yes,
see.
It was set aside for U.S. personnel only.
I see.
And this was just wonderful. You hop on the train, and in a few hours you're in the Bavarian Alps.
Yes, that was...
But getting back to the money, we used American money for our dealings in buying groceries at the commissary and articles at the post exchange, and the black marketing, which was against the law, but which most Americans practiced, was strictly on the side, as it
You're
were.
not including us in that group, Martha.
But American money was used for our foodstuffs and for our clothing and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, how about your housing?
Free.
Was it good or
Excellent.
excellent? Can you describe a little bit or an example?
Of
Or?
course, in the beginning, it wasn't. It was requisitioned housing or very rundown hotels.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there were some disadvantages, but when we came back for the second tour, 1956, wonderful apartments.
They had,
As I say, free, even gas and electric.
well, they had built housing for the dependents, and they had, whereas when we first went over, it was requisitioned German housing and hotels that were used for the American personnel. It was an interesting time.
Yes. Now, were the housing facilities built for the Americans by the Germans?
Yes.
That started in 1949.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they have housing areas. I think Heidelberg was the first
Yes.
area that was built.
Primarily for military personnel, of course, but there was additional housing for civilians. However, after a few years, 3 years usually, in our case 5 years, we enjoyed the good housing. We had to look for accommodations on what they called the economy
Mm-hmm.
in the German sector.
Right.
But the military picked up the tab for the rent and utilities.
And so that was very adequate also.
Yes.
You see.
Depended a great deal on what you were able to find.
Right.
And we were quite happy in where we were located, in Karlsruhe.
One thing about the schooling in Germany was there were, at the time we were there, little delinquency problems because the children were adequately controlled by their parents, and
Right.
if they weren't, the commanding officer would bring it to the attention of the father that he better shape up his kids.
Or we ship you back to the United States.
Yes.
I don't know whether that's true today.
I don't think so, because ever since then, they share the problems we have with the schools today, and even to the extent of drugs.
Right.
So-
But perhaps not as much as some
We
places.
hope.
But your description of involving the base commander would be somewhat analogous to calling in the local town mayor to straighten up the boy or girl who was not conforming in one of our schools,
Yes.
which of course would be a bit impossible. But
Yeah.
that was sure a lot of control that the dependent schools had
Yes.
at that time.
Yes.
Can you describe the dependent schools briefly from a general standpoint over there? How would you compare them? Now, Martha, you said that your three boys came back to California and they were ahead of them academically.
Yes, they came back in the third and fourth year of high school, but
Mhm.
their years in Germany had,
Prepared them adequately.
yes,
More
very
than
well.
better.
How were the school facilities overseas? The dependent school facility. Now, you were there early, and there was quite a variety, wasn't there, in school facilities?
In the beginning, the schools were all concentrated in Germany. There were no schools available to us, but the military requisitioned housing, some of the finest houses, and simply converted them into schools. The schools were smaller in the early days. So the total population in '49 was 5,000 students, and when it started out, only 2,500.
Mm-hmm.
And these were scattered all over South Germany, so the schools were small. And
You could be accommodated in a house.
yes, could be in a house like this. I mean, would accommodate 25 students easily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And was it true that there was even some castles taken over, and or?
Some were quite picturesque.
Uh-huh.
As other small schools were houses occupied by the military in casernes, what we call it, military posts.
Mm-hmm.
They had the engineers built a small school, or they made available. The responsibility for logistics rested with the post commanders, and they did what they could to make available the best houses for suitable for a school.
Now later on, they became quite
Elaborate, large structures.
more like the schools here in the United States, right?
Yes, except they were built by military engineers in companies,
Right.
and they had about all they needed
Right.
for a good school.
All right. Now, is there anything else that either one of you would like to share with us that we can keep as a record? Anything you can think of that you would like to tell us that we should know about, or any questions that I might be able to respond to right now?
Well, of course, the question that is uppermost in everybody's mind right now is the retrenchment in the military establishment in the United States. The schools will shrink
Right.
considerably in the next few years. I don't know, it's sometimes easier to expand than to shrink. But there will be fewer students over there and fewer teachers.
Absolutely.
And we're watching that with interest, what happens to our school system.
Right, right. Well, I appreciate how you refer to that in the possessive, because you certainly have some ownership involved, Dr. Beerbaum, and you too, Martha. At this point in time, in 1991, the Warsaw Pact of nations have undergone a rather drastic upheaval. Communism seems to be on the wane. The Russians or the Soviet bloc is no longer the threat that they used to be, and the NATO organization in Brussels has recently had to change their mission statement, and it seems that the Warsaw Pact, which is dissolved now also, and the Eastern European countries, which have cast off communism, has caused quite an upheaval in the military thinking higher headquarters in the United States, and as a consequence, the dependent schools are, quite a number of them are scheduled to phase out 200 or 300 a year up until the year 2000 now. I'm including in this a number of private schools too, as well as Department of Defense schools. So it's a very interesting time to reflect and see what's going on.
Indeed it is.
Historically.
Yes.
Right. All right, would you have anything that you would want to say in closing, Martha, that an extra thought? Or?
Well, the only thought I would have is that there seems to be a bond with all the people who worked for dependent schools, and we keep in touch across the United States and other places, especially at Christmas, and pass on information from one person to another as to what's happened to so-and-so, what's happened to Gay, what's happened to this person, and there's really a fellowship with anyone who ever was in the dependent schools.
Right. Very true. Very true.
I might say we have still contact with many Germans whom we befriended when we were over there. And they mentioned this fact, the shrinking of the school system, and they say they're very unhappy about losing the American touch in their communities. They've always, most of them like the Americans, and they said we shall certainly miss them when they leave their community.
Well, that's very interesting, and that's a good way to leave, isn't it?
Yes.
Leaving those kind of thoughts. All right. Once again, this is an interview in Flagstaff, Arizona, on the 18th day of May, 1991. An interview of Dr. Alfred Beerbaum and his wife, Martha Beerbaum, who spent many years overseas with the Department of Defense dependent schools and the military dependent school system. We want to extend to both of you an invitation. It will remain open for the rest of your lives to come and visit the American Over Schools archives, which are housed at Northern Arizona University. They are your archives. They do not belong to the university. The university just provides them for you because they could not exist without people like you. We thank you very much for this interview, and we wish all the best to both of you.
Thank you.
I might add that I'm glad the archives exist because the mementos I brought back from Germany, from my years with the schools there, now I know they're well looked after and for the years to come, whereas at home they would just lie on the shelf and our descendants wouldn't know what to do with them. And here they may be serving some useful purpose.
Well, they have found a home, and in closing, I will state that the Dr. Alfred Beerbaum collection is one of the most impressive collections that we do have in the archives. Once again, thanks to both of you. This is the American Overseas Schools Archives, located at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. And we are conducting an interview of Earl F. Fox and his wife, Judy R. Fox. Today is Wednesday, the 19th of June, 1991. And this interview is taking place in Earl and Judy's home in Darien, Illinois. Illinois, correct. Hello, Earl.
Hi, Tom.
And Judy. How are you today?
Fine.
Good. Okay, now to start off, I would like to have one of you, doesn't make any difference, or both of you, I'd like you to start with your full name and your address and telephone number, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Judy.
I'm Judy Fox. I live at 1121 Tamarack Drive, Darien, Illinois, 60559. Telephone number 708-964-4290.
Okay, Earl?
And I'm Earl F. Fox, and just by good fortune happen to live at the same address, same telephone number, and it's been a great time.
Okay, now, I would like to have you here again. It doesn't make any difference who goes first, but I'd like to have you tell us where you were born and where you went to elementary school and secondary school.
Yeah, I was born in Joliet, Illinois, 1921, and started school at the Lockport grade schools. And then we moved to Texas. My father was transferred to Texas. And there I went to an elementary school starting at age 7. We stayed there for 3.5 years, then came back to Lockport, went to Lockport grade school, finally graduated from Fairmont grade school, part of the Lockport Township School District.
In Illinois?
In Illinois. And then graduated from Lockport Township High School in Lockport, Illinois. Went on to the University of Illinois, had 3 years, went into the military, got out, came back after 3.5 years, and then finally finished my undergraduate work in 1947 in physical education. Received my master's in physical education in 1951, and then went on and got my advanced certificate in educational administration in 1954.
And this was all at the
University of Illinois.
In Champaign,
Urbana.
Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. All right. Now, Judy, where did you go to elementary school and secondary, etc.?
I went to a little country, one-room country school in Bigfoot, Illinois, which is in the northern part of Illinois, right near the Wisconsin border, named, of course, for the Bigfoot Indians. And went there for 8 years. I went to Harvard Community High School in Harvard, Illinois, and graduated in 1940. I attended the University of Illinois and received a Bachelor of Science degree in Physical Education in 1944.
All right, now, I forgot to ask you, Judy, where you were born.
I was born on a farm, in a farmhouse, not in a hospital, in a farm, between Harvard and Bigfoot.
Which is in
Illinois.
In Illinois. All right, thank you both. Now, before you went overseas, Earl, I assume that you were employed. I don't know if Judy was. She might have been a full-time housewife. But tell us what you both were doing from the time you left college on up until you went overseas.
Okay, I happen to have been recalled to, during the Korean conflict, was recalled to active duty and served for 2 years at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Then I came back to Urbana and to a brand new junior high school, and there coached football, basketball, and track, and taught physical education at the same time that I was working toward my advanced certificate in educational administration. I was also deeply involved with representing the teachers, speaking for them and on behalf of them, and working with the Board of Education on trying to improve our salary schedules. And we were told at one of the meetings that there was absolutely no money for any salary increases, that they were really in dire straits in the Urbana School District. And so one day I was back in my office at Urbana Junior High School, and the phone rang, and it was Dr. Lowell Fisher, who had much to do with getting the independent schools certified through the North Central Association. And he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yes." And I thought he was going to tell me, "We found some money to improve your salary schedule." But what he said was, "How would you and your wife Judy and family like to go to Wiesbaden, Germany for 2 years?" And he said, "We're not trying to get rid of you." And then he told me that Doc Mason was coming back in town and he's looking for a person who's well-versed in physical education, athletics, and who has an administrative certificate. And he said, "I immediately thought of you, and you know Dr. Mason?" I said, "Yes, I do." So he said, "Dr. Mason is coming in on Palm Sunday, 1959, and we'll meet you at the Palmer House in Chicago for an interview. So get yourself a ticket on the Panama Limited and go up to Chicago." I did. Met Dr. Mason coming down the stairs. He said, "Hi, Fox, how are you? Good to see you again." Shook hands. He said, "Let's go get a cup of coffee." We sat and talked for about 15 minutes, and Doc said, "I've got to go out to the West Coast and interview a few people, and we'll be back in touch." I got back on the train, went down and told Judy I'd had the interview. Don't know whether I'm going to be accepted or not. And finally, one spring day, I'd been out playing golf, and Judy was waiting for me when I returned. We were living in Champaign, and she said, "Well, you didn't get the job." And I said, "Well, I kind of suspected that." I said, "It's been a long time since we've heard anything." I said, "It would have been nice, but that's all right." So then she said, "No, you got it."
Oh,
And so from there we went through all the processing and finally ended up in school group headquarters, being a part of that team of people.
In Wiesbaden, Germany.
Wiesbaden, Germany. Got there in 1959, probably around the first part of August.
All right, thank you, Earl.
You're welcome.
Now you mentioned that that you had some children, I think, about that time. Judy, would you tell us, you know, their names and about how old they were at that time when you went overseas?
all right. Our eldest is Janet, and she was just going into, would be going into 2nd grade when we went to Germany. Marilee would be entering first grade, and our youngest Jeff was 3½. And so we all made the trip to Germany, and I think it was a marvelous experience, not only for Earl and me, but for our children, and it continues to be a fun thing for them.
Okay, now how old are they now? Is that, if that's not too personal?
Janet is 39, Marilee is 37, and Jeff 35.
All right. Now, Judy, had you worked prior to meeting Earl, or were you involved in education as a teacher or anything like that?
Well, we met in school when we were students, and we were married when we were students at the University of Illinois. And when Earl went overseas in World War II, then I taught for 2 years physical education at St. Anne High School, and that's in Illinois. And when Earl came back from overseas and went back to the university, then I moved back with him and worked in offices and just something to keep me busy and bring in a little money. And then our children came along.
Started coming along.
Mhm.
All right, so you are an educator too then, a professional educator,
Right.
as well as a home educator. Right, all right, now I thank you both for that. Earl, I think you've explained how and why you went overseas. Now I would like for the two of you to recall where you had your assignments overseas. You said Wiesbaden is where you arrived, and you went first to school group headquarters. Now go on from there on through, where you were assigned overseas.
Okay, the first assignment was as the coordinator of physical education and athletics for the Air Force dependent schools, and to be an assistant to Ron Downing, who was one of the 4 area superintendents at that time. And so that continued to be that way for a year. And then Dr. Mason, actually I also worked for Ken Kennedy. So it was combination, almost 2 years had elapsed then.
Now Clarence Kennedy, at that time, he was District 1 superintendent in England?
That's correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they came back, moved over and worked for Ken. So 2 years had elapsed, and then one summer Dr. Mason said, we need a principal at Ramstein Air Force Base. So he looked at me and said, Vox, you're qualified. And he said, we don't have to look stateside or go any further. We're going to send you to Ramstein. So we learned to say that correctly, which went well with the German people. And was the principal then for the junior high schools for 1 year. Then Doc came down and said, well, Fox, we'd like to have you come back to Wiesbaden, headquarters school group again, and we'll give you a promotion from a GS-11 to a GS-12. And I said, well, I think that would be fine. We'd like to stay here as long as we have been here. But I had made a partial commitment. I've got something in the mill here to work with SAC, Strategic Air Force Command in Nebraska, and to be with their school system for the dependents. So I stopped any action on that and wrote and said that do not consider me as a candidate for that position, that I will remain in Europe.
Now, SAC at that time were operating the Air Force dependent schools in Spain, weren't they?
Well, they also had, I think they were, Tom, but they also, this was to be a stateside.
Oh, a stateside, perhaps
right.
at Omaha, Nebraska.
Omaha, Nebraska.
I see.
That's correct. So I ended up going back to school group headquarters then, was located there for an additional 2 years after the 1 year at Ramstein. And for a while I was an assistant to Helen Johans. I was also...
Let's see, Helen was what then? She was Mediterranean superintendent?
That's correct.
District 4.
And then I became a district superintendent. The whole thing was broken down from 4 large area superintendents to a bunch of districts. The district that I had was one with all of the kind of outlying schools. Oslo on the north, and we went into Pakistan on the east, and it was just an interesting kind of situation. Small schools to the largest one being at Rhein-Main Air Force Base in Frankfurt, and that came under my bailiwick at that time too. Then I ended up being actually an assistant to Bob Kirkpatrick, who was one of the assistant superintendents, so to speak, for operations, and had to make sure that all of the schools were staffed with the number of people that were needed to carry on. And so I was left then with the responsibility of doing that phase of Kirk's work, so I assisted him. And in 1964 then, we didn't know where we were going to fit into the pattern for this reorganization coming under now Department of Defense dependent schools, rather than just the Air Force or the Army or the Navy, all under Department of Defense. And in the retention rosters that were set up, they could not tell me exactly where I would fit in, but they would have a job for me. But I decided I didn't want to wait around too long. I had a chance to maybe go back to Urbana, same school district from which I had come to work with the Air Force. And certainly it worked out just right that the person who had taken my place at Urbana Junior High was leaving. They would be happy to have me come back to Urbana. I didn't have to go stateside for an interview or look around for a job. I was able to go right back to the school district and the school that I had left, and stayed there for 4 years. Then came up here to Hinsdale High School District 86, where I completed 15 and finally retired then in 1983.
Now that person, Earl, that you mentioned at Hinsdale, who?
The person at Hinsdale was Mr. Les Murray, who actually became the superintendent of the Air Force dependent schools for a while. And when he moved back here also in early '64, he came back to Hinsdale to watch the present Hinsdale South High School in the process of being built. And he was told, you just go out and find the faculty that you want for your school. And so he did. He went all over the country trying to find the people that he wanted to head up Hinsdale South High School. And he came down to Urbana one time along with Buford Daniel, who had been with the Air Force dependent school system. Buford and Les were both at Hinsdale South, Les as the principal, Buford as his assistant. Then Les became an assistant superintendent and moved up. Buford became the principal of Hinsdale South, and they had asked me if I would come up and be an assistant principal for pupil personnel services. And the opportunity arose. It was good timing, time to leave the Urbana district and move up to Hinsdale. And so it all worked out fine. It was a professional advancement all the way around. And so it was great to work for Les for a while until he retired. And Buford became superintendent. I became principal for 1 year, and I realized that's a big job. And I really said, I don't want to die in office. I'd rather let somebody else have that. And so I said, hey, if you'll give me my old job back, being closer to students and teachers, then I would prefer that, and let somebody else have all those headaches.
And then you retired in
I retired in 1983, which was just 8 years ago.
And so you've been living here in Hinsdale and for?
Since 1968.
68, all right. Now Judy, let's backtrack and go back overseas when Earl started his career over there, overseas, And tell us what locations you lived in, the family. Anything that you might think would be interesting to tell us about that.
Well, our first experience was to move the family, our family of 5, excuse me, into a pension in Wiesbaden, which was on about the 4th floor up near the maids' quarters. And we had a huge room, and there we were with a hot plate and all the beds. And it was cozy living for 6 weeks. And finally, we were able to get an apartment on the economy in a German home, and stayed there then until the next summer.
Now the economy, on the economy, that means...
That means it's not government housing. It's not controlled by the government at all. It belongs to private German citizens, and they rented the apartment to us, and we paid our rent to them, and that was it.
Out there living with the Germans.
Right.
Okay.
And that was an interesting experience to live on the economy. We enjoyed that, and our children enjoyed that. It was our first year there. Out of 180 school days, Earl was gone for 100 days. And it was a real education for me. Our children had the mumps and the measles. Our middle child, Marilee, had both of them at the same time, and it was a tricky period of time for us there. And but it was, we all lived through it, and it was, we were better for the experience, I guess. Then in the summer we moved into government housing in Heidelberg.
Heidelberg is
in an American housing
located in
Wiesbaden.
Wiesbaden, huh?
And we were there 1 year, 2 years.
Year and a half almost.
Year and a half, and then moved to Ramstein and lived in government housing there. And came back to Wiesbaden and lived in Aukum, which was another government housing area in Wiesbaden. All of it was a great experience for us.
Thank you, Judy. Those are the places that you lived overseas prior to returning to Champaign-Urbana.
Right.
Right. All right. Now, either one of you, or together, if you can recall some unique, atypical experiences that educators and families would experience overseas, different than if you had just stayed here in Illinois, can you, this catches you off base, but can you kind of reflect something that is very unique or something? So just kind of talk on that a little bit.
I can. We went to Wiesbaden, and I think we'd been in this little room in the pension for a week, and then went as a family to Berchtesgaden to a conference. And when we came back from the conference, I think Earl and I probably had the most serious argument of our lives, and I was so upset, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was not homesick. I did not want to come back to the States, but things just weren't right. I wanted to stay, but it just wasn't right. And finally it dawned on me, I guess this is culture shock set in, and after that big argument, everything
I don't even remember the argument.
everything fell into place, and it became just really a great experience that a school teacher with 3 children and his wife could never have experienced back here.
Thank you, Judy.
What I liked about it was that when we did have some vacation time, we could take the whole family, and within 1 day's travel time, we might find ourselves in Paris, or we'd be down in Berchtesgaden. In another day's travel time, we could be in Vienna, and taking the children along with us. Went down one time during the Christmas vacation, the Christmas break, when we were in Ramstein, and drove our little VW bus down there. And we're looking for a place to stay, and some German lady said, "Oh, you don't want to stay in that hotel, it's too expensive. Follow me," she said. So we followed her, and she finally pointed out a little place, really a German Gasthaus. And we said, okay, we'd go there. So we checked in, and we found out there's a little restaurant right next door, and the German waiter just took a shine to the children, particularly Jeff. Jeff was about, he said about 4.5 by this time, maybe almost 5, with his red hair and everything. And so we ordered some soup because it had been a cold day. And this waiter put the soup down in front of Jeff, and he wanted to indicate that it was hot. So he took a spoonful of soup, and he blew on it to cool it off a little bit, then he put it in Jeff's mouth. But those are the kind of experiences we thought were memorable. Those kind stick in our mind for many years. But the opportunity to travel, whether I was on TDY with you, Tom, and the rest of the people in the school headquarters, or whether it was on a vacation trip, we saw things that were so interesting. Getting into Gibraltar, where you and I walked around, and where I got sick from fish and chips, and I had to keep from fainting flat out. I had to lay down alongside a curbing. I remember you telling people, hey, he's not drunk or anything, he's sick. I remember that in Gibraltar. But also in Turkey, I remembered that we were told, don't drink the water. The water is terrible. So when it came time to brush our teeth in the morning, this is where we first used scotch as mouthwash and something to brush our teeth with, and then spit it out, rather than to drink that water. You don't find those kind of experiences back here stateside. But I will say that when we visited the schools there, they did not all have the same kind of things that we have in an affluent community, such as Hinsdale is. All the fine things in a school building, and yet the education that the children got there was outstanding. And I think that our own daughter Marilee and Janet had some of the best education of their lives in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grades at the dependent schools. Some of it was done in a Quonset hut at Ramstein. Some of it was done in a nice school building in Wiesbaden, the elementary school there. But they saw the wide range of kind of classrooms, and I'm firmly convinced that the good footing that they had there resulted in continued success when we came back here.
I'm sure of it. And thank you both for those memories. Now, coincidentally, and it's good fortune that we have Judy and Earl's daughter, one of the daughters here, Marilee, and would like to have you come over here, Marilee, and just get down there on your knees to where you're about head height with Mama, something like that. And we would like to have you, Marilee, if you can, just recall a few things about your education that your father just mentioned over there, what your reactions were to going to school over there in comparison with going to school here in the States, and just anything you want to say.
I don't know about comparison because I went to kindergarten here and then we went over, so I don't know what I can say about it, comparatively speaking, but I loved it. And I think looking back on it now, one of the main things that I think made it such a good experience was there was no TV there to watch. So we found all kinds of other things to do. We were outside. If we weren't in school, we were outside playing. Or in the winter we would go sledding a lot. And there were just all kinds of other things to do besides sitting in front of the TV. I look at my kids now, and I every day I vow to myself to get rid of my television sets, and one of these days I'll do it. But I loved the traveling. I remember once going to Switzerland, and we used to go camping a lot. And we got into this campground in the evening and set up the tent and went to sleep. And then in the morning, I was the first one out of the tent. And I unzipped the zipper and just went, ah, because right in front of us was this huge mountain. And we, had no idea it was there when we got there in the evening, but it just took my breath away. And everybody rushed over to see what I was gasping at. And just wonderful experience like that were real, and they stuck.
So you got to meet some foreign people too, even as a student going to the dependent schools.
Oh,
You
sure.
got to meet Germans and German boys and girls, I assume.
Well, when we lived on the economy, we played with German kids in the neighborhood and went snail hunting in the empty lot next to us, and rode our bikes up and down the sidewalk with them. And
Maybe you can relate a little bit about Sybil when she
Oh.
first came to babysit for you children.
I don't remember the first time. We had a friend of ours named Sybil, and I don't know how Mom and Dad got her name, but she was a German woman that came to babysit for us, and we're still friends with them. They come over here and visit us, and Mom and Dad go over there to visit them. So that's been a long-lasting friendship that was formed during those years that we were there.
May I interject there? That friendship started in that little pension in which we lived when we first arrived in Germany, and there was a German lady in the pension with her husband. They were there from Argentina, but they were, Germans, but currently living at that time in Argentina. And she said to me, both she and her husband took a shine to these little American children, and she said to me, I have some nieces who would really like to babysit for an American family so they could practice their English, and that was how this
Or
started.
maybe it was after that day you got into that fight with Dad, and she saw how
No.
stressed out you were. She thought you needed a break from the kids.
Got into a fight with Dad?
That
Remember
argument,
that argument you
Oh.
My culture shock
Yeah, that was you
explosion.
referred to earlier, yes.
that's amazing. I don't remember that at all.
I don't.
Well, no, see,
Oh, was that the day we went on the bus and
No.
you got frustrated because you were trying to find out directions?
no, this was after we came back. I guess I was just culture shock, that's all right.
Now, did you pick up any of the German language?
Well, mine is really bad now, but we had it in school. I think when I was in third grade, I started learning German. So I had it third, fourth, and fifth grade there.
So you picked up some of it,
Yeah.
some of the language, probably the street language, how you get
Well,
along in a restaurant. And,
I could
that sort of
get
thing.
by, I guess.
Mm.
But
Now, I can remember your father. He was pretty good at a fractured German, I guess would be a good phrase for that. And Earl, we used to have you now and then at various conferences and that sort of thing. Talk to us in that. I don't know if I'm using the right phrase or not. I would call it fractured German or Americanese German. Or could you give us a few words of
That was definitely fractured German, and it came as a result of having read Saturday Evening Post. A fellow by the name of Dave Mora would write and say, Fabelins, mein Großvater taught me. And then he'd go on speaking mit dieser deutschen words and getting a little bit of German and a little bit of English. And we'd also always end up with if somebody was leaving and departing, the German word, of course, for a good traveling is now pronounced gute Fahrt. But in those days, when we were over there, the word is fahren, and they would say, gute Fahrt. And so the Americans, of course, hearing that would always kind of snicker. And we would send people off on their journey with, und now, before their trippen, you've been starten, we're alles been wishing you eine biggest gute Fahrt. And that's the fractured German.
Fractured German. Thank you very much, Earl. Now,
That goes in the archives, Tom?
oh, you bet. That'll be there for a long time. You bet. Now, is there anything else that you would like to say without me asking you a question regarding regarding your experiences overseas that you think should be said? Any advice to anybody? Or have we pretty well said it?
I think we've pretty well said it. I think culture shock was something that I didn't believe in, but I certainly did, and hope that people will hang in there when they get that uneasy feeling and after just a few weeks in a foreign country. For us as a family, I think being able to meet Earl's Swedish relatives and his German relative was provided many memorable hours of happiness, and it was something that just a real treasure in our lives, I think, having had that opportunity.
Well, having been over there for originally going to be for 2 years, and ended up staying for 5, gave us really a wealth of experience and knowledge about the world that we never would have had, other than from what we had learned in books, in our geography, in our grade school days, a little bit in high school. Then some of this fell into place. We'd get out our maps and look at what these places were. But being a part of a school district that encompassed an area bigger than the United States, and from young people who would come over just touring and drop in and say, hey, I like what I see here. Do you have any openings in the American dependent school system? And now and then we would hire these people on the spot, and they were called NTEs, not to exceed a certain period of time, while we were still looking for highly qualified people stateside, so they'd come over under all of the rules and regulations that applied. And so these people, some of them would be hired like that. In fact, I believe that Nancy Knight at Rammstein had been hired as an NTE teacher and was named one of the outstanding teachers, got the Sustained Superior Performance Award for being an outstanding teacher, and our children were, at least Janet was fortunate enough to have had Miss Knight. Did you have Miss Knight also? But anybody who would have a chance to go over there and be a part of the dependent school system, organized as it is now, to do student teaching over there, for which you are really pushing that, Tom, and I think it's a great idea if young people can get the opportunity to do student teaching in a dependent school system. They would never get that kind of experience stateside. And it has always been, they were able to demand quality education over there. They got the best teachers. If they didn't fill the bill, they were just said, we're sorry, and your contract is terminated, we'll get you back home.
Well, thank you very much. Referring to some of the student teachers we have, last year we started our first group of Northern Arizona University student teachers in Europe, and some have already been hired for next school year. Right from student teaching, been hired. The American Overseas Schools Archives want to thank you, all three of you, for letting us interview you. And of course this tape is going to be kept in the archives for this generation and future generations, and for as long as the university exists. And we would like to have you come and visit the archives, and Marilee, like to have you come and look at them too, and perhaps your children, and on down the line. Once again, this is an interview conducted by the American Overseas Schools Archives at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona, conducting an interview of Earl Fox and his wife Judy Fox and their daughter Marilee. And this is in their home in Darien, Illinois, on the 19th of June, 1991. And we thank all three of you very much.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
That was very well done. You really,
It's better than prepared for.
that was very well done.
On
Much
that
better.
hand, you have to think about it. You just say what you
Come across as
have
natural.
in mind. That's right.
What I should have said was there was also that camaraderie of the
Oh, there was a unity, there was a esprit de
Americans
corps.
in the
there
esprit de
wasn't
corps in the school.
Do you want me to pick that up? Oh, by the way, there's something else I want to say? All right.
You
just
say
to-
that.
Oh, you say
All right,
that.
wait till I get it going here now.
I'm always spouting off
You want to say, you want to talk about that?
it. No, I just.
All right, now, we just closed this camcorder down when Judy decided that there was something else that she wanted to say. Go ahead, Judy.
I neglected to say that in addition to all these wonderful opportunities afforded through the overseas employment, the great esprit de corps that existed among all the teachers, the administrators over there, and I think that, and the friendships, that's why we're here now for this reunion this weekend, and it's just, it was great.
Yeah, I'm glad that you thought of that, Judy. That is the reason why we are here, because there is a Department of Defense Dependent Schools reunion taking place in the Allerton Hotel the 21st through the 23rd. And that's why we're here, and we're guests in the Fox's home. That camaraderie and friendship, there's going to be, at last count, over 90 that have come in from all over the United States, and we're going to be having a lot of fun talking about the good old days, I guess.
Should be fun.
Thank you very much for reminding us of that, Judy. Okay.
Mom?
Now, even though we've got the dates on the little timer here, see, it's got 6/1991.
Lived up to
We
my
try to
reputation
repeat
of
on the
always
front end and the
stopping
back end, because 200 years from now,
Yes.
even though the people there tell us at the in the audiovisual department that we don't have any
You've been
worry,
interviewed or
that the
been
state of the art and the
the
progress that's just being made almost daily is that they can keep this stuff. They'll update it and fix it and repair it, and it'll be here forever. Yeah.
Well, that really, if you'd have started this 25 years ago,
Oh gosh,
or 30, just think, it didn't have something like this that
we
you
didn't have it, did we?
could sit down, it'd be so expensive to try to, you know.
Well, the good part is that they have a host in that university to accept these things,
Right.
and a place to keep them.
That is good.
Thanks to Tom.
Yeah, you were the prime mover
Well,
in that, weren't you?
we're lucked out. We lucked out. We really did.
So how long have you been doing this now?
Well, Tom got it established about 2 years ago, didn't you, Tom?
A year ago, I can't get this thing to go off now. What the dickens?
He got a little bit of funding from the university, but not very much. It's been all that
Oh, here, that's